I wonder what he found. If what he wanted was to be the leading man in his own story, well, perhaps he's gotten it, down in wherever he is right now. I wonder if he's happy with his choice, and if he's learned the heavy cost that comes with it.
In the game, The Stanley Parable, you play as an office worker named Stanley, who is given instructions through the narrator's voiceover.
When Stanley came to a set of 2 open doors, he entered the door on his left.
You're given agency to contradict what the narrator describes, though. Depending on the choices you make, the narrator will respond in comedic and insulting ways.
Stanley took the first open door on his left. Stanley was so bad at following directions, it's incredible he wasn't fired years ago.
Even the way the introduction is written makes you want to disobey. Before the title card even comes up, the narrator gives a pitiful description of your character.
Orders came to him through a monitor on his desk, telling him what buttons to push, how long to push them, and in what order. This is what employee 427 did every day, every month of every year. And although others might have considered it soul-rending, Stanley relished every moment that the orders came in, as though he had been made exactly for this job.
The narration is practically mocking you for obeying the rules, so that by the time you actually can make decisions, you feel compelled to prove him wrong. If you just did what the narrator said, you'd be confirming the portrait that was painted of you. Before you were even given control of the character, you are already primed to prove who you are through your disobedience. In the world of the Stanley Parable, disobedience is a virtue. Of course, the video game is just another iteration of office workers rebelling against the monotony of their jobs. Our cultural moment holds up disobedience as a virtue. In his book, You Are Not Your Own, Alan Noble observes that in our culture, we idolize rebels, freethinkers, and mavericks. Our modern myths are stories of rejecting traditional expectations to discover your true, pure identity. As we have seen, in the contemporary anthropology, to be fully human is to be autonomous. Society reinforces these claims in its structures, values, and practices. Disobedience is seen as the means of asserting your individuality, your autonomy. Like Stanley in the parable, if you want to truly be you, and not just some mindless droid, you should disobey to show you are an individual, that you are your own unique person. Disobedience is an expression of self-defining identity. But is disobedience always virtuous? Is disobedience ever virtuous? By what standard do we make that call? I'm a Christian in the historic Protestant tradition. Protestant meaning one who protests. I come from a tradition that has spent a long time thinking about what it means to have an identity of protesting, of rebelling. And that's why I hope to provide something valuable to the conversation around what it means to disobey, and especially how that disobedience relates to our identity. My name is Travis D. Barrett, and this is a video essay on finding identity in disobedience. In 2022, we got a brilliant reimagination of Pinocchio. It brought the classic story to a new generation. What is this trash? No. I'm talking about the other Pinocchio remake in 2022.
Pinocchio!
Father, when can I leave to be on my own? I've got the whole world to see.
Oh my goodness, no, not that one either. No, I'm talking about Guillermo Del Toro's stop-motion interpretation. Now this movie, this is good. Gorgeous, creative. I mean, come on. He's using puppets to make a movie about puppets. It's brilliant. And most of all, it's thoughtful. Del Toro uses the mechanics of a puppet, something that is controlled by a puppeteer, to explore different relationships and ideas. He sets the story in fascist Italy, when Mussolini was in control. Though Pinocchio is a literal puppet, he actually thinks for himself, which contrasts with the fascists who blindly obey without thought.
If he's a puppet, where are his strings?
That's true. Who controls you, wooden boy?
Who controls you?
In the context of fascist Italy, which demanded a total conformity and loyalty to the state, Pinocchio's ability to think for himself and disobey authority is actually virtuous. This is quite the departure from the 1940s adaptation of Pinocchio. In that film, he must learn to obey so that he can become a real boy. Obedience is presented as a virtue, while it is presented as a vice in Del Toro's version. And this was intentional. Listen to Del Toro talk about the moral lesson of the original movie.
I identified with that. I didn't like
at all. It stuck in my craw, the idea of obedience and being something you're not in order to be accepted. So those two things are completely counter in our Pinocchio.
So in Del Toro's movie, conformity and obedience would actually be immoral. The virtuous ones are not those who went along with the authorities, but were the ones who rebelled.
If I'm going to make a movie about disobedience being a virtue, what better place to set it than in an invisible sort of string world where everybody obeys except the puppet?
Baby poops his pants right there in front of me. The poop in hand.
Poop? Yes, poop, Your Excellency.
But to say that disobedience is a virtue without adding any qualifications surely is missing something. I mean, anybody who has ever raised children or led a group of people knows that a community cannot survive if disobedience is held as a virtue. No, Del Toro isn't actually advocating for valuing disobedience in and of itself. The motivation for the virtuous disobedience that he is presenting can be found in that first quote from the interview. He had a problem with obedience and being something you are not. And if obedience is being something you're not, then disobedience is being something you are. Disobedience is staying true to who you really are instead of pretending or conforming. And so Del Toro presents Pinocchio's defiance as a celebration of all the weird kids who don't fit in and don't conform to the mold. Pinocchio's disobedience is him being true to who he really is. But theologically, that claim is problematic. To say that disobedience is how we stay true to who we really are, to find our identity in rebellion, is to find ourselves in the company of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Alan Noble writes, "From the Garden of Eden, humanity's fundamental rebellion against God has been a rebellion of autonomy. Adam and Eve were given a clear law and chose to become a law unto themselves." So, saying that a real boy, a real human, is disobedient is to see Adam as the model of a true human. It roots our identity as humans in self-defined autonomy and rebellion. The church must enter completely into the Third Reich. It must be coordinated into the rhythm of the national revolution, and it must be fashioned by the ideas of Nazism, lest it remain a foreign body in the unified German Nazi community. This was the kind of nationalism the German church was threatened with during the 1930s rise of the Nazi regime. The vast majority of the German church was swallowed up by the National Socialist agenda, popularizing a sort of Christianity that existed in service to the state. However, there were several leaders in the church who resisted the racist and fascist direction the church was headed. For example, I have to mention Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a Lutheran pastor who created an illegal seminary, fought to protect the Jewish people, and took part in a plot to assassinate Hitler. But the Christian leader we're going to focus on is the Swiss theologian from the Reformed tradition named Karl Barth. In one of his most famous contributions to the Christian church's resistance in Nazi Germany, Karl Barth wrote a statement called the Barmen Declaration. In contrast to the German church, that had effectively become the religious arm of the state, this declaration identified 6 theses that showed that the church's allegiance to Jesus Christ compelled it to resist claims of totalitarian authority from other sources, even the state. The first thesis says that Jesus Christ, as he is attested for us in Holy Scripture, is the one word of God which we have to hear and which we have to obey in life and in death. Barth's entire theology, as well as his reasoning for resisting the state, was completely centered around Jesus Christ. In the second thesis, Barth writes, "As Jesus Christ is God's assurance of the forgiveness of all our sins, so in the same way and with the same seriousness is he also God's mighty claim upon our whole life. We reject the false doctrine, as though there were areas of our life in which we would not belong to Jesus Christ, but to other lords." His disobedience to the state is towards the higher end of obeying Christ. But why does Christ get Barth's total allegiance while the state does not? Was it simply a matter of personal preference? As though Barth were saying, "I personally want to follow Jesus more than the state," implying that another person could rightfully have a different preference to follow the state over Christ. No, this wasn't an expression of Barth's preference, but a declaration of reality. You see, the reason Christ makes a total claim on a human's allegiance, and an authority like the state cannot, is because Christ is the true human. Every other human in history has failed to be truly human because of sin, but Christ is the first to truly be what a human was made to be. We see this true humanity in his sinless life. Barth writes, "In his acts, he was without sin. He was perfectly obedient. It was Christ's obedience to God, not the state, that led him to love others and be executed by the state as a criminal. It is in this sinless life, a life of obedience to God, that we see what we as humans truly are made to be. This disobedience is in contrast to Adam, who failed to be what humans are made for. Adam chose to disobey God, to define good and evil on his own terms. So Barth argues that we shouldn't look to Adam, the disobedient human, to define what it means to be human. Man's essential and original nature is to be found, therefore, not in Adam, but in Christ. And that means, in practice, that to find the true and essential nature of man, we have to look not to Adam, the fallen man, but to Christ, in whom what is fallen has been canceled and what was original has been restored. This is why Christ can claim complete and total authority on a person's life. By being obedient to the one true human, we become what we were made to be. We enter into Christ's new humanity by submitting to and obeying him. And those who define their identity in disobedience would be in the humanity of the first Adam, the one who rebelled against God and failed to be the human he was made to be. So Barth's resistance was rooted in a theology that centered around Christ as the one true human who was a total claim on a person's life. And any state that tried to usurp that claim was an attempt to draw a person away from true humanity and into a subhuman existence by following in the disobedience of Adam. To be drawn into disobeying God, to sin, is subhuman, a failure to live in the reality we were made for. Barth writes, Jesus Christ is the only real man for God. Everything depends on what we mean by real. Here I do not mean that we men do not exist, but that there is a kind of existing that lacks reality. Man in sin exists, but is not real reality. He does not accomplish what it means to be a man. Yes, Christ is the only real man before God. He fulfills the real existence of man. In C.S. Lewis's sci-fi novel Perelandra, a man named Ransom visits a water planet with only 2 inhabitants, a man and a woman. This couple live on floating islands and will act as the parents to an entire species. They are effectively an alien Adam and Eve. Their creator, Meldil, said they could live on any of the floating islands, with only one exception. They are not to make a residence or live on the large rocky continent called the Fixed Land. This is the only prohibition they are given. Eventually, a nefarious human scientist named Weston comes onto the scene with the sole purpose of convincing the lady to do the one thing she was told not to do, to take up residence on the Fixed Land. At first, the lady dismisses the idea as outlandish. Why would she ever want to disobey her creator, Meldil? Ransom argues with Weston to try to prevent the lady from making a decision she will regret. Back and forth for hours and days and weeks, like a devil and angel on the lady's shoulder, the 2 humans try to sway her to either obey or disobey. At one point, Weston tries to convince the lady that it is actually her creator's desire for her to disobey him. Meldil is beginning to teach you to walk by yourself without holding you by the hand. You are becoming your own. That is what Meldil wants you to do. He says that the Creator actually wants his creation to grow in wisdom, in making decisions for themselves, which is why he gave such an apparently arbitrary command at all. Meldil told them not to reside on the dry land, Weston argues, so that they would disobey him and become autonomous. In every other command, it is apparent why they should obey, but this one has no visible reason other than for them to obey it. These other commands of his, to love, to sleep, to fill this world with your children, you see for yourself that they are good, but the command against living on the fixed land is not so. There is no good in it. Meldil himself is showing you that at this moment, through your own reason, it is mere command. It is forbidding for the mere sake of forbidding. But why? In order that you may break it. What other reason can there be? He longs, oh how greatly he longs, to see his creature become fully itself, to stand up in its own reason and its own courage, even against him. Weston frames disobedience as a virtue, as the right thing to do, because by it the lady will become mature and wise. She will become fully herself. The lady has trouble dealing with the suggestion until Ransom offers an alternative explanation to the apparently arbitrary command. I think he made one law of that kind in order that there might be obedience. In all these other matters, what you call obeying him is but doing what seems good in your own eyes also. You do them, indeed, because they are his will, but not only because they are his will. Where can you test the joy of obeying unless he bids you do something for which his bidding is the only reason? Ransom reframes the arbitrary command as an opportunity for true, selfless obedience. This kind of obedience, the kind where the creature doesn't know the reason for the command, requires trust. It requires faith. It requires a familiarity with the character of the lawgiver to determine if he is trustworthy or not. The lady can look at all the other commands that Meleldiel has given, and how they have consistently been for her good, and how his relationship towards her has only ever been one of care and compassion. And from that consistency of character, she can deduce that he would only ever command something for her good, and so she should obey because she can trust him. But why wouldn't Meleldiel just tell the lady why he gave the command? What benefit is there to forcing her to trust him? Well, it creates the opportunity for intimacy that wouldn't have been possible had there not been trust. Because it forces the lady to not only be familiar with Meleldiel's character, but to act in accordance with that familiarity. This faithful obedience brings their relationship to a new level of intimacy. Meleldiel didn't just make her to blindly obey like a robot that has no thoughts or desires of its own. He made her to be in a relationship with him, a relationship built on trust and intimacy. As opposed to what Weston has claimed, the lady becomes fully herself, not by asserting her own desires over her relationship with Meleldiel. She becomes what she was made to be by maintaining her trust and intimacy with her Creator through faithful obedience to his commands. I've made reference to Alan Noble's book, You Are Not Your Own, throughout this video essay, and at this point I think I need to explain the basic premise of his book. Noble argues that our modern society has prioritized autonomy and self-definition to an unhealthy degree. The motto of modernity is, I am my own. Therefore, I owe no obedience or submission to anyone. In contrast, Noble uses the first question in the Heidelberg Catechism as the ideal alternative. I am not my own, but belong to Jesus Christ. This is where he gets the title for the book, and he spends the rest of the pages exploring that idea. You are not your own. You don't belong to yourself. In Anthropology, defined by our belonging to God, is diametrically opposed to the contemporary belief that we are autonomous, free, atomistic individuals who find our greatest fulfillment in breaking free from all external norms. Of course, there is a reason we in the West have been shaped to fight for autonomy, and Noble recognizes these very real factors. The turn toward autonomy in the West was prompted, in part, by horrific abuses of authority, hierarchy, religion, and tradition. So when we hear the phrase, I am not my own, our revulsion is partially a reaction to real and significant abuses of power that we have experienced in our own lives and that have occurred throughout history. Before we can go on to consider how the belief that we are not our own can reorient us toward our true anthropology, we must acknowledge and address the very real danger of this idea. Anytime you accept that your life does not exclusively belong to yourself, you open up the opportunity for evil people to take advantage of you in new ways. The danger in giving up individual sovereignty to another authority comes from the risk that that authority does not truly desire your good. There's always the suspicion that any authority besides you will look out for themselves over your needs. This creates in us a strong desire to hold on to control of our lives. The reason autonomy feels safe is that we think we can trust ourselves to look out for our own well-being. I know that I will take care of myself, but if I submit to your authority, I expect that eventually, despite even your best intentions, you will use me in harmful ways to benefit yourself. But Noble points out that even though we'd like to believe that we have our best interests in mind, we are deceived by our own hearts constantly and choose things that are bad for ourselves. Do we actually desire our own good? If we were honest with ourselves, we'd have to admit that, on average, we aren't much better than anyone else at desiring what is truly good for us. We regularly desire and pursue self-destructive experiences and goals. I know what I need to do to care for my body, and yet I regularly do the things that will harm me, and fail to do the things that will benefit me. Humans can treat themselves as objects for their own dehumanization, all while justifying it as self-expression and liberty. Self-expression can actually be dehumanizing, a failure to live how we should. This is why I'm always cautious when I hear disobedience framed as being virtuous. The word disobedience can also be used to sneak in the idea of individual sovereignty, of self-definition and autonomy. And in those instances, disobedience can actually be dehumanizing. Let me conclude by synthesizing everything together. Karl Barth showed how we do not look to the disobedience of Adam to define our humanity, but to the obedience of Christ as the true human. This is why he centered his resistance to the Nazis in his obedience to the real man, Jesus Christ. C.S. Lewis showed in Perelandra that although it can be tempting to see disobedience as the means of becoming fully ourselves, our identity is actually found in the intimate communion with our Creator that we were made for. And that intimacy comes through faithful obedience and trust. And finally, Alan Noble has provided nuance to what we mean when we say obedience, as there is often trepidation about allowing something outside ourselves to lay total claim to our lives. Trepidation that rightly comes from personal and historic examples of abuse. But, likewise, Noble also shows why self-ownership and individual sovereignty equally lead to unhealthy choices that dehumanize us. And so, he makes the following countercultural claim. We need to belong to someone who is perfectly able to desire our own good while desiring their own good. Someone for whom there cannot be a conflict between our good and their good. We need to belong to Christ. So, the way Pinocchio becomes a real human, according to Christian thought, is not by learning to cut his strings and follow his heart. No, Pinocchio becomes a real human by giving the strings to the right master, the real human.
It's hard to listen. It's hard to obey. It's hard to listen when I really wanna do it my way. Yes, it's hard to listen. It's hard to obey.